This is Raphael's School of Athens, continuing on with the High Renaissance in Italy. In the Pope, Pope Julius, was remodeling everything. He was building St. Peter's. Bramante was working on that. I had Michelangelo working on the Sistine ceiling, which is the Pope's private chapel. And here, this is part of the Pope's private apartments. It's his business office. It's called the Stanza della Signatura, which is the rooms that he does where he signs things, I guess. So it's an official sort of room. It's a large room with you see at the lower left corner is the top of a very big door. So it's a very tall room with vaults, and these semicircular vaults leave spaces on four of the walls for these these frescoes that he could represent different aspects of the world that the Pope wanted to represent. He wanted to see himself as scholarly, intellectual, like the humanists. He has one wall that has to do with law, one that has to do with justice, and they're all intellectual ideas, and they're about taking the ideas of Plato and or the Greek ideas and combining them with the theological works, or to see what it was about that was consistent with or consonant between the ancients and the church, and using them to sort of reinforce things. On this wall, this is called the School of Athens, and it represents together all the Greeks, the Greek philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers. Right in the middle, you see Plato and Aristotle walking together, and Euclid bending down, teaching some students, and it's Ptolemy here. I think this is Pythagoras over here on the left. Socrates is down here. Several philosophers are represented, plus students, and it's shown as if it's a big open space in some sort of fantastical architectural setting, though it's not entirely fantastical. At the time this was being made, St. Peter's was being built, and St. Peter's has these barrel vaults like this, and it's this sort of scale, though it's actually larger. It has niches filled with sculpture, though at the time they weren't built yet. All they had at the time were some barrel vaults sitting there, and that's why this sort of looks kind of like what St. Peter's was looking like at the time this was painted, open to the sky, and it just had some pieces, and he filled it in to create a fantasy world in which all these Greek philosophers are all together in one go. Look at it in relationship to the other High Renaissance paintings, the Last Supper, for example, a frieze of figures, or going back to Perugino's delivery of the keys. That's a closer work in that there's a frieze here and there's a big open space, and these arches are actually similarly positioned as the building in the background of Perugino's delivery of the keys. Perugino is actually depicted right here in the corner. Move over there. Perugino's right here, and Raphael's right here, next to each other, because that's his teacher, and sort of a little homage to him to put Perugino there. And it's kind of an homage to him to have a composition similar to his. This is a fresco, and it's nearby. The delivery of the keys is just along the corridor into a room. The Sistine Chapel is just a few steps along the way from here. So it would look right sitting next to it. It has large monumental figures all standing in classical contrapposto poses, or many of them are, and they're dressed in togas, and they all look alla antica, volumetric, simple simple drapery, very little surface detail, but it is a fresco, and the use of perspective in such a way so as to give a vast amount of space illusion, but at the same time bringing the back of the picture, the farthest thing, up to the front, like having the very farthest thing be a geometric shape that's right in the center, right on the vertical axis, having the whole thing symmetrical, and having this lightest part pop up to the front, because light things move forward in the spatial cues sense. Also having this faraway arch exactly parallel the arch that's not quite as far away, and the one that's closer up to you. They're all concentric to one another, so that they work very similarly to a work I'd shown earlier by Ghirlandaio in the Sassetti Chapel. It also has the arches that go back into space like this, but at the same time are geometric shapes that repeat each other, one above the other, one on the same plane as each other. So anyway, in addition to representing all these Greek people, he used contemporaries as models. For example, Euclid over here is Bramante, which is, bending down, teaching some students, holding a compass in his hand, or dividers, doing some sort of geometric figures like Euclid would do, but it's Bramante's face. And Michelangelo is here in the guise of, I believe it's Heraclitus or some other Greek scholar. And he wasn't part of the original plan, and there is a drawing of this that has all these figures pretty much as they are, except there's a big blank space here. And he decided, after he'd started, to add this figure. And it does look kind of added on. This block here doesn't look to be in exactly the same perspective scheme. It's out of skew with everything else. And the figure seems a little bit more massive. It looks, this kind of pose, sort of a brooding pose, looks, for all the world, like one of Michelangelo's figures in the Sistine Chapel, which, as it happens, was being painted at the same time. And so he could go in there in the room just a few steps down the corridor and see Michelangelo working and see his figures. So he's made a figure like Michelangelo's figures that are large, massive. We'll see those directly. And he's given in Michelangelo's face. It's interesting to see this very large man with this tiny little pen writing, which would be something that the Greek figure that he's representing would do, but it's also something that Michelangelo would do, since he was himself a poet, and he was a sort of a dark, brooding figure as well. He didn't want to do the Sistine ceiling, as we will see shortly. This has all those characteristics I showed about the High Renaissance, and the symmetry, the balance, proportion, harmony, gravitas, all those things that are on that list. This is another one of the monuments. When we get to Michelangelo, though, he's kind of a special case. A lot of those things don't apply to him as much. This is the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and in the, I believe, 1508 is when he was asked to come down. The Pope asked him to do it. He had been trained as a painter at a very young age. He was apprenticed to Ghirlandaio, and he did a very little of that when he was very young, still a teenager. He went to live with the Medici, and he learned sculpture there. The Medici had a lot of antique sculpture that he could copy and study, and he came out onto the world with as a sculptor. He did the Pietà. We'll see that later. I'm moving all the sculpture and architecture to the end so that we can have, because I wanted them all on one side of the midterm, so that they weren't split up, so you can have them as objects to compare to one another. But he did the Pietà, he did the David and others, and he was pretty much the best sculptor in the world. But the Pope asked him to make paintings, and because it was the Pope, he had to. And he clashed with the Pope a lot. If you watch the movie Agony and the Ecstasy, you can see the sort of problems that occurred between them. But the Pope wanted him to do a certain program, to paint something, and Michelangelo argued with him, and he told him to paint whatever you want. The thing about Michelangelo's paintings is that he used almost exclusively figures as his mode of expression. There's some architecture in there, but basically he uses figures to tell stories, but really to express power. All of his figures are very muscular, massive. They look like powerful figures, like Hercules or something, every one of them, males and females. They tend to not be actually exhibiting the power, just power in repose. Look at any of the figures in the ceiling. They're sitting. They tend to be in twisty poses, or poses that are kind of awkward, or at least not the normal sort of pose that a person would be in most of the time. If you look at, like, for example, this pose, this one, as you go along, is like he decided he needed a figure on every one of these to sit on every one of these pedestals, and each one had to be different. So he went to pains to make sure each one was different, and each has an interesting way so as to display that massiveness of this figure and to express just the beauty of the human form, but also this is just how he spoke. His language was in the figure. Look over here in the bottom right corner. This is very much like the Michelangelo figure that's in Raphael's School of Athens, a brooding figure, face sort of propped on his hand like that. The way this is divided up, this is it's not a semicircular barrel vault, but it's called an infrasemicircular barrel vault. That is, it's a shallow circle, but this is all a smooth surface, and these triangular shapes called pendentives are the intersections of the top of these vaults, or rather these top of these I guess semicircular lunettes. They are the tops of the windows of the wall. The wall has a kind of a loggia going down it, and those a barrel vault extending from them, penetrating through the axial, the longitudinal barrel vault, creates this triangle, curved triangle called a pendentive. So that's the only shape. This is very smooth, and these are very smooth. There's just this edge right here. And Michelangelo has created a fictive architecture to create frames. All of this is fictive. This is an entablature that goes in and out to create pedestal shapes. These, I guess you could call them pilasters, to divide the space into several rectangles. And the ones on the top and the bottom, or the ones on the left and the right, as you would see if you were standing there looking up at it, they create this aisle down the middle, which is further divided into these bands across, and they have he's represented with light and shadow, this architecture that he's made up. But between these are paintings. Later, when we get into the Baroque, artists will do this, ceiling paintings, where this is not, where it has architecture painted into the ceiling, but the sky would be up there. It would be as though this is the architecture of the building being extended, and that the spaces between would represent the building is open to the sky, and things would be happening in the sky. So that is not what this is, because these are conceived as paintings put on the ceiling. And these rectangles are opportunities to put paintings. And notice, for example, that looking at each painting, it's oriented so that the bottom of the painting, say, is on this right side. This right edge is the bottom of this painting, and then it works for each one, alternating large and small paintings. It each has a top and a bottom, so gravity, I guess, points downward towards the right in this picture for each of these paintings on the ceiling. But the figures that are on these pedestals and all the other figures that are down here, these are prophets and symbols. That is, people who prophesied in the figures from the Bible who were prophets, but also symbols are the pagan equivalent of prophets, who were seers, and they had prophesied things that the church thought of as being prophesying the coming of Jesus. But these are all oriented in such a way as being part of the fictive architecture. So even though this figure here, say, looks a lot like a figure over here, this is oriented this way into a gravity that refers to a world in which the building that you're in is oriented. And these others are paintings on the ceiling. Okay, now that we've got all that straight, this is the story of creation with the creation of light and darkness, the separation, creation of the moon and the sun, and creation of Adam, creation of Eve, the expulsion from the garden, Noah's Ark, and the drunkenness of Noah going down to the left there. So this is all a very complex program. And looking at it, it's very busy. It's filled with all sorts of figures. When you think of not just the figures within the paintings and the figures on these pedestals and the prophets, but in the little spaces here, like each one of these spaces has a figure, and each one of those is different. They're painted as if they're made of, like they're sculptures, as if they're kind of a warm brown color, as if they're maybe bronze or gilt. And then there's these pairs of little nude babies called ignudi or putti, which are like little baby angels that are standing. Each one of those is a different pose, and it's interesting the fact that he's able to think of a different kind of pose for each one, so as to show, I guess, the variety that you can have with a human figure, and each one is expressive differently. The one that we're going to be looking at close up is going to be the creation of Adam. And before we talk about that specifically, I wanted to show you some of the figures close up. When you look at this kind of figure, it's one of the Sibyls. It looks monumental, massive, very, very strong with a huge arm. This is a female figure, though it might as well be male. The volume of the drapery that's on them when they are clothed, the drapery itself is also muscular. It's very voluminous. It seems to have some of that same strength, power as the figure. He uses the same kind of coloring technique that goes back to Giotto, Masaccio, and Ghirlandaio, his teacher, where you have, in many instances, light and dark of a color are used to create modeling. When you use the lightness of the surface as your light, and you add black to make shadows. In some places, but in other places he'll use a different hue to create shadows, giving an overall more colorful effect. For many centuries after this was painted, it gradually became darker and darker through candle smoke. People had come to think of the darkened version as Michelangelo's style, not knowing that it was actually covered with soot. And for a long time, people thought he didn't do color. Everything was sort of grayish tones. And then once it was cleaned, just in this century, in fact, it was, I believe, in the 80s that it was cleaned. 90s, mid 80s to mid 90s or so. It was cleaned, and it was all these colors were revealed. There was a controversy over it because people thought that they were adding the colors, because they just couldn't conceive of Michelangelo having used these bright colors, and especially all these hues to model with. But this was the normal Florentine way of painting for most of the Florentine artists doing fresco. So the creation of Adam, I'm zooming out so you can see the entire composition. It is a rectangle. You can see little bits in this cropped picture of the architecture over here. And there's the arm of one of the figures that's in the in-between figures. Those little bits here. So you have this space here. This is a painting on the ceiling. It's very simple, with a landscape over here indicated by this curvy line. It's kind of bluish, and then another one represented by another curvy line, and then it's kind of modeled, but it's represented without any kind of details. There's no plants or anything. It's shown so as to represent in a stylized form Earth. There's one figure, Adam, over here. There's God the Father over here creating, and he's reaching out and he's about to touch him, and presumably when he touches him, he becomes a living soul. The Bible says that he breathed into his nostrils and became a living soul, but that would be difficult to depict and to read. There were other representations. There's one by Jacopo della Quercia, a relief sculpture similar to this, where the figure of Adam is very similar to this, and God is standing there and reaching out his hand. So this was not entirely original as far as a way to depict the creation of Adam. But what Michelangelo has done is used the figure of Adam here. Look at the large, massive, muscular figure in repose. In fact, it's languid because it hasn't yet received the spark of life. Although spark is actually anachronistic to say in this context. But when I say languid, is that it looks like it's very powerful, but it's not moving or exhibiting the power right now. It would be if it got up and did anything, but it is a figure he's using the figure to express this. Anyway, God is in the same pose to compare, because man is created in the image of God. The very similar pose, and except that he's turning to look at God. God is turning to look at Adam, and in God's right behind his arm here is Eve, and this is sort of like she's not yet created, but she's in the mind of God. And if you think, how can you represent God when he's omnipresent as a figure? He's used a traditional, like a river god image of God to represent God the Father, but he's also put him in this sort of cloud. There's this billowing bit of fabric that's flowing in the air, and it's filled with little angel babies, some who are holding him up like he's being born over the waters, as it has in Genesis. And it looks kind of like a head. You look at this is the back of the head, and there's the front of the head with the brow and the nose and the beard, and it's as if this is God's head too, and that he exists both as this figure and the overall figure. The place, if you were superimpose Adam onto this, where his leg goes up like here, it's like where this baby is similar to it. So Michelangelo doesn't have the symmetry, the balance, and the perspective that the other high Renaissance artists did, but his work is it's just all about the figure. When I think of one of the characteristics of the high Renaissance, the decorum, that aspect, when you think of the Last Supper and everything, Michelangelo did nude. And this is a church, and he was completely, he didn't have any problem at all with nudes. And when he was asked to do the Last Judgment, this is after the High Renaissance is over. This is in the 1540s. It's in what's called the Mannerist period. He did it in all nudes again. This is the Last Judgment. This is in the same building. There's the ceiling up here. Above these lunettes, but this space here with the two arches all the way down in this rectangle is the Last Judgment, and the Pope, the next Pope, called him back to do this, and gave him free rein to do whatever he wanted, and there were problems with it. People objected to all the nudes because in the intervening years, so many things had changed. In 1519, Leonardo died. Next year, Raphael had died. There was the sack of Rome. There was the Protestant Reformation. The world essentially was turned upside down for everybody, and art could no longer be the high Renaissance anymore. All those things that represent an ideal world just wouldn't be appropriate anymore in a place where the world was no longer anything like that. This picture, and when we get to the Mannerist, will express some of that change in history, where the chaos of the times was represented in the a reaction against the High Renaissance, where things go beyond the directions that it had started, and to not idealism but to distortion. There's lots of distortion here. There's lots of ugliness here, and there's lots of pain and suffering. But that's expected in a last judgment. Here we can look up close. Christ, who looks like a Hercules sort of figure, is judging with Mary cowering beside him, so you can see the wrath of God. He's looking over to the right side, which is the hell side, or the damned side, and judging with this hand. You can see his power. He doesn't look like any Christ figure on a cross or any other one, because he looks so massive and powerful. And you can see the reactions on the faces. People who I probably want to intercede and say, let's be a little more forgiving. But I think Michelangelo this is pretty much his attitude to the wrath of God. In fact, this is Michelangelo's self-portrait. This is the way he sees himself in relationship to the Last Judgment. It's just a skin. Some of the Pope's entourage complained. One in particular was a cardinal, I think, down here, this guy. He's like the king of hell, the Charon, and he's represented as a devil, I guess, and he's got the mule sort of horns, and he's has a snake wrapped around him. I think Dante described him. He has a snake, and the number of times it goes around has to do with the level you go to. But the snake's biting his crotch, and he's down there in the bottom of the deepest part of hell, and the face that he's been given is the face of this cardinal. That is, Michelangelo has cast the cardinal in the role of the deepest part of hell. And that cardinal complained to the Pope, and the Pope joked that hell was outside of his jurisdiction, that if he had been in purgatory, he could have helped him, but being only Pope, he can't. He has the keys to the kingdom of heaven, but not of hell. So this is wild. This is very different. The figures are extreme. When you look at the musculature of all these figures, they seem to have extra muscles. I think one description is like a sack of nuts, where they seem to, every muscle is flexed, so that they're just lumpy blobs everywhere. We're outside of the High Renaissance now. These are the saved souls coming out, and they don't seem particularly happy about it either. So there's Michelangelo. So let's move on next to the Venetians. the Venetians were different from the Florentines. They were, your book says they're not just rivals. They thought of themselves as superior to the Florentines. They Venice is an isolated city. It's defended in such a way that it's almost you can't conquer it, because it's in the middle of the water, and the only way to get to it with an army is over the water. So you have to have boats, and they have a very strong navy so to protect themselves. So it was a very successful defensive strategy to put Venice there. It's also on the water lane, so that they could go anywhere and travel and trade with everybody. So it was very rich. They did a lot of trade with Byzantium and Constantinople, and a lot of the Byzantine art influenced the art in Venice. Remember back at the Bellini Madonna and Child with Saints, the architecture that they're in is kind of like St. Mark's. And St. Mark's, when you walk into it, it looks like Byzantine. A lot of gold mosaics, and the art is very Byzantine looking. By that, the characteristics are patterns, bright colors, jewel-like things. Things look like treasure. But now in the High Renaissance here, things are not. They're not doing that anymore. They have oil paint. Oil paint is good. It has the ability to create the illusion of these bright colors, and you can do anything with it. It doesn't dry very quickly, so you can change your mind. You can do all sorts of things. And they also have canvas, because ships, sails, it's common. It's a common thing, and because it's a very humid climate and very watery climate, it's hard to have frescoes on a wall. I don't know if they have any frescoes in Venice, because it's so wet. So they adopted the oil on canvas as a medium much earlier than the folks in the southern part of Italy. This is Giorgione. This painting is called The Tempest, and what you see is a landscape. There's a dark, ominous sky with a tempest brewing, and there's some lightning. There's a distant city buildings, but there's also sort of a wild natural environment with some ruins. And there's three figures. There's a woman nursing a baby, looking out at us. She's got this piece of cloth going around her shoulders. She's sitting on a piece of cloth, but she's otherwise nude. Over on the left, you have a male figure, who's standing, holding some sort of pike or a punting pole of some sort, and he's dressed variously. Various interpretations of his dress. He might be a mercenary soldier. He might be whoever. I don't know. It's not known. It's a mysterious sort of picture. You can zoom out and see the entire picture there. It has lots of ambiguity to it. It's difficult to tell what's going on. It's very soft and feathery, brush-stroked, and it's look up close a little. Giorgione made this sort of paintings. He didn't. Well, go. I'm sorry. Moving the picture over apparently brings the other picture back from before. I just wanted to look close up at it. Here we go. Giorgione was very much influenced, and at the time there were lots of people translating poetry from Latin poetry and trying to do some themselves. And the kind that was popular was what's called a pastoral kind of poetry that involved things out in the countryside, and they're written in such a way as to be very ambiguous, sort of suggesting of a story without actually telling it, giving you impressions and and letting you sort of figure out what's going on. And this is sort of a painting of that sort of thing. It's like a painted poem. It's a beautiful thing, and it's mysterious. It has that sort of mystery that Leonardo's have, and is it's safe to say that he probably saw some Leonardos and understood that sort of aesthetic. It's very much different from the Florentine thing, where everything is sharp, in focus, and clear. There's mystery to it. There's prettiness to it, decorative quality, where feathery brushstrokes and bright colors, all these textures, patterns of foliage, are all to make a beautiful, wonderful poem kind of thing. The next one is a very similar sort of picture, in that the way it's painted, the subject matter, the ambiguity of the non-specificness, I guess, of the subject matter is similar to it. This is a painting by they don't know, it's either Giorgione or Titian, because Titian, we'll be dealing with next, was the next painting. He's associated with Giorgione. He might be a student or a collaborator, but this could be by either of them. It has qualities, I guess, of both. Softness, landscape, figures, feathery, mysterious, a subject that's difficult to interpret. Here you see two men sort of sitting on the ground like they're having a picnic, and they're playing music, and there's two nude women in near them, and there's a little shepherd in the background. Why would these women be nude? Well, they could be muses. That is, the people who inspire poetry and music they could be representations of those. Though if they're represented as naturalistic nude women as if they were from the same world as these two men are. So they're not made to be anything other than real. This is one also has various interpretations. So you can read in your book what sort of interpretations there are, but I guess the takeaway is that it is like a poem, especially in that it's not clear, and that it's meant to stimulate and to arouse in you, the kind of things that a mystery or a story that suggests more than actually tells. You can look up close to this one a little bit more. You can see that the figures all have the figures blend in with the ground a lot. Look at the edges of the figures. It's difficult to see exactly where the edge is a lot of the times. They blend in. Like that's one of the aspects of featheriness. Look at the figure of the vase here. Where you can see some light against dark, or dark against light, you can see some edge, but other places the edge completely disappears. It's like things are in the real world. It happens. It's a visual phenomenon that things you don't always see the edges of things when they're in shadows, and part of an object is in shadow, and its edge again from its dark into this dark background, it blends together. There's not clear-cut lines around anything. In fact, as far as if you think of the two different ways of looking at the world, the conceptual and the perceptual way of looking at the world, the Florentines were kind of conceptual in that they paint the picture of the world as they know it, space as they know it, and objects that have a clear line around them. We have a little edge around them, so this is where the object is, and this is where the object isn't. That sort of thing. But a perceptual view of the world as it appears to your eyes, which is different from the way you know it to be. You know it to be from your experience. You look at a thing and you hold it in your hand. You can feel, where its edge ends, and you make a model in your head of what that image is. So to make an image of it conceptually is to essentially draw a line around it. To do it perceptually is to do it like this. Some places it blends in, other places it doesn't. And that creates a way to unify a figure with the ground. It's part of one of the solutions to the figure ground problem, is to um, give the figure qualities of the ground, or to diminish its contrast with the ground. Another point to make is, you think of this in relation to the the influence of the northern art is to make it's realistic. It has surface details, but not overly much. It's still Italian. Look at this lute. The perspective is just right as an object in spaces, but he has an opportunity here to put all these neat little details that lutes have, the patterns that occur here, but he doesn't. He just has this sort of natural texture. He doesn't. You don't see the strings. He's not giving you the tiny fine details that the northern artist would have. So I guess that would be a distinguishing feature between this and the northern is still Italian, still has similar